Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for joining me. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from wherever you may be viewing this session today and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues present. My name is Lisa Dean, and I'm a Regional Advisor for Diversity and Wellness across the Eastern Metropolitan area of Melbourne, and I'll be taking you through the session today. A copy of the presentation with links embedded is available on our website for you to view and share with others. So let's get started. Earlier this year, the department ran the first of quarterly pulse surveys for aged care providers and stakeholders. So this was really about understanding the level of readiness for upcoming reform changes. So responses indicated that only 26% of in-home care providers were well aware of the reforms, while 72% felt somewhat prepared, and across all stakeholders, 40% said they were not getting the level of detail required to plan and prepare. Overall, responses identified the need for more targeted and detailed information that's delivered with sufficient time and via appropriate channels. They want a whole of system picture of the reforms and longer implementation times, which I'm sure many can relate to. So the department has indicated that they'll work to address the issues raised, particularly in relation to providing a clear narrative, more context, and publish project information early and often. Now, you may or may not see your own thoughts about readiness for change within these figures. Either way, today is really an opportunity for you to confirm or check your understanding of the reforms, what's happened, what's happening now, consultation opportunities and outcomes, and where to find relevant resources. I hope that the information that you hear today helps you to prioritise what you can be doing as part of your transition and planning. So many of you will have attended or viewed the recording of the third Reforming In-Home Aged Care Update webinar presented by the department in December. So during the webinar, the department shared feedback received on the initial design of the new program, and they also provided a bit of an update on the reforms. And of course, you can view a recording of the webinar via the link in your screen. But in summary, the feedback suggested that there is provider support for supplementary grants for different service types and thin markets, and that there is support for flexible funding to meet changing needs. There are concerns around client self-management and clients who receive services from multiple providers. Workforce constraints and competition for staff is a particularly big issue, as we know. So there was also lots of feedback that the proposed system is too transactional, with the potential to limit innovation. And finally, providers reported that they're looking for a greater focus on client outcomes and quality. And it's likely, again, that some of this feedback will sound and feel very familiar to you, but for obvious reasons, it is really important that we continue to share our feedback and thoughts with the department at every opportunity. I wanted to give you a quick update about the new integrated assessment, which will replace the current NSAF, and it includes the development of a classification framework. We know that the department has completed a living lab trial to test the new assessment tool, and they have completed work to address the issues raised during that trial. So they're now set to undertake a much larger trial to test the revised prototype assessment tool, and this will occur between March and April this year. So RAS and ACCS pilot sites are currently undergoing training as I speak, and we look forward to hearing the findings of those trials. Under the new program, we're expecting that older people will have upfront access to assistive technology and home modifications, in addition to any other supports the person requires. So the department has completed a series of online consultations and co-design workshops to explore the future model. During the consultation, the department heard the stakeholders want the scheme to include preventative measures that promote early intervention and encourage people to plan for their future. They want improved aged care assessments with the potential to allow prescriptions from physiotherapists, for example, who might be working as an aged care assessor. And they want wraparound supports to ensure that assistive technology and home modifications are available for trial, that they're fitted or installed by qualified people, that they're safe to use, and that training and supports for users, as well as follow-up, reviews, and reassessments are able to occur. Recommendations received to make this model work include the provision of clear guidelines, better support for people living in rural and remote areas. And this includes greater use of teleconferencing or video conferencing and allied health assistance where appropriate. Recommendations were also made for the scheme to include rental options to minimise waste and to increase support offerings. And finally, as with most schemes of this nature, stakeholders want it to be appropriately funded. So the department is using feedback to develop the policy and the model, and they're also progressing work to ensure that the program meets the needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, and people from other groups, including those living in rental properties. And again, no doubt we'll hear more about this new exciting scheme into the future. So changing direction now, I want to speak briefly about the Commonwealth Home Support 2023-24 grant extension. So by now, you should have received a letter from the department about your proposed funding and outputs. So over the 2023-24 period, your organisation will continue to receive fixed monthly payments in arrears based on 1/12 of the total value of your grant agreement. You'll also be required to continue with monthly performance reporting, and the 100% flexibility provision will remain for all CHSP service types and sub-programs, of course, with the exception of sector support and development. So essentially, this means that you can flex between service types that you deliver so that your funding is fully spent. The department has indicated that some grant agreements will be reviewed and varied to account for unexpended funds. Now, advice from ACCPA, the peak aged care body, is that the department is monitoring outputs being delivered relative to your contracts, and you need to be particularly vigilant in maximising outputs. So the old saying is likely to apply now and into the future. If you don't use it, you'll lose it. ACCPA are also suggesting this is the likely direction that any future grant program is going to take. So all the more reason to be vigilant and have data and evidence to justify where and why there may be shortfalls. There are some changes to national unit pricing, which will automatically apply from July 2023, and you can see these on your screen. Now, again, ACCPA is suggesting that these prices are likely to be very closely aligned to what we're seeing in other human services sector, for example, in the Veterans Affairs space. So we know how important it is to get the pricing right for the future program. And as a really keen advocate in this space, ACCPA have hosted a webinar which included a Q&A from Russell Herald, who's a key program manager for the CHSP program in Canberra. And I will make a link to that recording available. We've spoken previously about how important it is that you understand the cost of delivering your service. And the department has emphasised this in their most recent Readiness reform advice. And payment in arrears, which is happening now, is just the first step in facilitating an approach where the funding follows the client. So this is all about understanding what is driving your costs. So how much is attributed to salaries or material, vehicle use, and overheads, etc., that are necessary to deliver one unit of service. And it's also about being able to track the cost of services that you deliver to your clients. If you haven't done so already, you should also be scheduling a review of your approach to client contribution or your fees policy. And again, the government has clearly stated on many occasions that providers should have client contribution policies and procedures in place. And we will be offering a workshop in April to support you in this activity. In the meantime, the Easter Sector Development Team and our SSD partners are offering a final online workshop to support you to understand the cost of delivering your service. It's being held on the 28th of February. It's online. And if you are in a position to influence the progression of unit costing within your organisation, I really encourage you to register for that session. And finally, we know that there are a number of significant issues for providers relating to workforce, one of which is the recent work value case, which will have ramifications for many organisations. So I wanted to share an update of the Fair Work Commission work value case with you. And this advice is presented by Troy Speirs, a policy officer with ACCPA, who has kindly provided permission to share.
The other aspect to be aware of at this point in time is the Fair Work Commission and the aged care work value case that's currently in progress. So there was a work value case stage 1 deliberation that occurred in November with the findings on the 4th of November, which included an interim 15% increase to wages for some aged care classifications, award classifications, nurses, personal care workers, and SHADS awards, which would cover some CHSP providers. Now, it's important to note that interim 15 increase that will be incoming, and the dates are yet to be determined, will be based on award rates and not enterprise bargaining agreement rates. So if you have EBAs with your staff, you will only, the funding that will come to support award rate increases will only be equivalent of award rates. So you're going to need to have line of sight on what this will mean for how you navigate your enterprise bargaining agreement arrangements when they come up again. Stage 2 is the next process where they're deciding on the implementation of the interim 15% wage increase to these identified employee classifications and the time frames at what point the increases will come into play. So that's in deliberation now. The hearing for this stage 2 decision is on the 13th of February next week. And we don't yet know whether the Fair Work Commission decision on stage 2 will be handed down, but when it will be handed down, but hopefully it would be late February, early March, so you can then plan for that. So you need to be watching this process very clearly as information that's going to be important for your operations come into play. From the Fair Work Commission decision for stage 2, we should find out the following: when the interim 15% increase for direct aged care workers is likely to commence. We suspect it could be 1st of July, but again, we need to wait for that advice. Whether the 15% increase will be phased in, so will it come in blocks? We know the Department of Health and Aged Care's submission to the Fair Work Commission talked about a 2-stage process, part of the increase occurring on the 1st of July 23 and another part of the increase occurring on the 1st of July 24. So we need to know how it will be phased and what the Commission's recommendations are on that, and whether recreational activity officers, lifestyle officers, and head cook and chefs will receive this increase as well. That's particularly relevant for residential care. And if they receive the 15% increase, when will this recur? In the CHSP fact sheets that have been issued around grant extensions, the department have advised they're considering implementation options to deliver additional funding to CHSP providers who need it in a targeted and timely manner. So they're going to be looking at that. and we wait to receive advice. I think Russell will talk to this point at Thursday's ACCPA webinar. And the design of this implementation is also being informed by the results of a recent CHSP survey on employee salaries, employee occupations that was carried out in November, and you should be aware of that. Stage 3, submissions for the stage 3 of this 3-stage aged care work value case is due to the Fair Work Commission by the 28th of February 23. So ACCPA is preparing its submission for that. And it's important to note that the focus for that stage 3 determination includes consideration of the work value claim for all those award classifications that are not receiving an interim increase as an outcome of the stage 1 decision, where stage 2 is determining the timeframes and the approach to implementation of that increase. Any further wage adjustments that are justified on work value grounds will also receive the interim 15% increase. And this is because not all of the material put forward before the Fair Work Commission was considered in that stage 1, stage 2 determination. In particular, the Fair Work Commission hadn't yet taken account of the impact of the work value case on COVID and the impacts on understaffing. And that advice will come out at a later date. So there's a couple of things to keep an eye on there. Key points to note in the Fair Work Commission's aged care work value case, ACCPA with the unions and some large providers and consumer peaks filed a joint statement in December that the interim 15% increase for direct care workers should become operative as soon as possible and not be phased in, and that it should be fully funded by the government, including on cost. So that's industry and consumer peaks, and the unions are all in agreement on that. In contrast, the government filed its submission on stage 2 matters and stated that the interim 15% increase should be phased in over 2 dates. 10% of the 15% increase on the 1st of July this year, and an additional 5% on the 1st of July next year in 2024. And that would be linked to funding, noting that the government has said additional funding would start at the same time as the increases becoming operative relative to their submission, but they were not clear on what they considered to be on costs and how exactly the funding would be calculated. So what the total amount of additional funding would be to realise the 15% increase, that was not clear in the submission. Department advice in the CHSP grant extensions, I've mentioned that already. Okay, thank you.
Moving on now to all things IT and data, you are likely to be aware that the department were exploring options for a new payment platform, which would enable the payment and reporting of government subsidies and client contributions, with an option for client bookings where appropriate. A survey consultation on the design of the payment platform was completed in September 2022, and not surprisingly, the results of the survey showed that providers use a wide range of internal systems. They prefer to submit data monthly, and that it would be difficult for many providers to take up a new system because their existing ones are rooted in how their business operates. In summary, concerns were raised about enhancing integration with current government portals, the impact of subcontracting and brokering services, the perceived need to increase administrative staff to help manage service delivery data, and poor uptake by consumers of digital offering. So in response to the feedback, the department is now considering how the existing systems can be enhanced to facilitate payments without the need for a new payment platform. This does not mean, however, that there isn't work that you need to be doing in this space. And a high priority for all organisations is to ensure that all of your clients are registered on My Aged Care. So the department is undertaking a third and final data migration exercise to capture all eligible CHSP clients who do not currently have an active client record in My Aged Care, but who are receiving services. And I want to say again, this is the final opportunity that you have to ensure your client data is correct. And it's really an important exercise because we all want to guarantee that all older people will be able to transition to the new program on the 1st of July 2024 without any interruptions to the care that they receive. And as you can see on the screen, this process needs to be completed by the 26th of May. The process is completed through My Aged Care portal, and it involves the collection of information from clients with consent, of course, things such as their gender, their name, date of birth, current address, and either a Medicare card number, Centrelink reference, or a Department of Veteran Affairs number. There is no requirement for these people to complete a full RAS assessment. So the department has released a quick reference guide, which is available to support you in this process. Finally, I would encourage you to be thinking about how you can make better use of technology to support not only efficient and effective service delivery, but innovation. And this is really about examining and understanding your processes. So who does what, when, how, and why? And I encourage you to do this free of assumptions. And you might actually be surprised that in practice, things don't work the way you think they do or should. Once you actually have this information, you can look at what can be automated. What is it that can be done remotely? What good practice do we retain? And what could be outsourced? And then look at systems that are going to support your particular needs. In many ways, this is an approach to service review and processes that should already be reflected within your existing continuous quality improvement activities. And this is really about looking at your operations through an IT lens. So one of the biggest pieces of work in the reform agenda is the reworking of the regulatory framework, which primarily sets out the rules and guidance to ensure that people are receiving high quality care. And of course, this will all be underpinned by a new rights-based Aged Care Act that's currently being drafted. So the new Act will replace existing legislation, and we should expect to see and hear more about this in the second half of the year. But I thought it'd be useful just to remind ourselves about the 4 key foundations of the new regulatory model. So it will be rights-based to ensure that protections are in place to uphold the rights of older Australians. It'll be person-centred, so placing the needs, the goals, the values and preferences of older people at the centre of the regulatory model. It'll follow a proportionate risk-based approach, which is expected to allow the regulator more flexibility in how they apply the compliance tools. So, for example, the responsibility of providers and the regulatory response by the Commission might differ depending on the type of services being delivered, the setting in which they're being delivered, and the type of provider. So this new approach is expected to focus regulatory efforts where the risk of harm is at its greatest. And finally, the model seeks to support an ongoing commitment to improve the capability and the quality of the aged care sector through continuous improvement. And one of the impacts of this might mean that education and engagement as a first response by the regulator. So around the time of our previous News in Brief session, the department was launching a consultation process for the revised aged care quality standards. So this included a webinar, there was a series of 9 focus groups, and there was also an invitation to submit written feedback on the proposed changes. So we're still waiting to see a summary of the feedback, but we should expect that to hit our inboxes shortly. It is understood, however, that the strengthened quality standards align structurally with the NDIS practice standards, and that the revision has really sought to improve synchronicity with those practice standards while recognising differences between aged care and disability support. So I'm sure this will be really good news for those providers who receive different funding streams. We do know, however, that the Commission will be undertaking a pilot to understand how the strengthened quality standards are going to apply in practice. So Ernst & Young have been appointed to lead this project. So the plan is to include a small group of volunteer providers in the pilot, and they'll range in the type, size, location, and consumer cohort. And the Commission will use the insights gained through the pilot to understand whether the draft standards can be effectively implemented, to determine how they will adjust the way they assess provider performance, with a particular focus on testing a redesigned approach to auditing and assessment. It will consider how graded assessment is introduced to better differentiate performance, and they'll identify what supports you need to understand and meet the improved quality standards. And of course, how best to support older Australians to understand what the standards mean for the delivery of safe and quality aged care. So the Commission has published a provider fact sheets, which includes details about the pilot, but also about how you can apply to participate in the pilot. And you can access that information via the link on your screen. As part of the government's focus on governance and oversight, a new Inspector General has been appointed to drive greater transparency and accountability across the aged sector. So the role will focus on government-related funding, regulation, and administration, and they'll undertake independent reviews of systemic issues, publish reports, and provide recommendations. Many of you may know Ian Yates, AM, who has been appointed the Interim Inspector General of Aged Care last December. And it was at that time the sector was also provided with an opportunity to provide feedback on the draft role statement. So the Inspector General will have oversight of the Department of Health and Aged Care, the Aged Care Quality Safety Commission, the Independent Health and Aged Care Pricing Authority, and any other service or body regulated or funded through government. So again, no doubt we'll hear more about these functions as the role is established. It's probably also worth mentioning here that a dedicated Complaints Commissioner has been appointed for an 18-month period. And this arrangement is subject to the outcomes of a capability review of the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission. Now, this is currently being completed by David Tune. So amongst other things, the capability review is all about considering whether the Commission has the necessary regulatory and investigatory skills and assessment and enforcement skills to meet its remit, so what it is there to achieve. And we should expect that the final report will be completed in the next few months. There are new governance arrangements which were introduced for approved providers on the 1st of December 2022, with implementation to be completed by December this year. So while these don't yet apply to CHSP only services, again, it's likely that some aspects of this reform will impact into the future. I think it's also really important to acknowledge that the recommendations of this particular reform also reflect good practice. So it's certainly something that you should be considering, including as part of your transition planning. So amongst other things, the changes relate to the need for the establishment of a quality care advisory body and a consumer advisory body. Irrespective of whether these changes are relevant to you now, it is critical that your boards or committees of management understand the aged care reform and the potential impact for governance across your organisation. So the Eastern Sector Development Team and our SSD partners are offering a 2-hour workshop on Wednesday, the 8th of March, for board members and senior executive and management. So this session will take a strategic look at aged care reforms, what we know and how it's likely to impact service providers. It'll discuss the new governance arrangements and structures and the expected new requirements, including their relationship with the new quality standards. The session will also provide insights about strategies for transformation that boards should be applying to support readiness for the Support at Home program. So I strongly encourage you to share information about this session with your boards and promote their involvement. So I'd now like to cover off on a few quick reminders. And first up, you'll be aware that CHSP commenced for in-home care from the 1st of December 2022. So CHSP sets out the arrangements to prevent and manage incidents and to notify all reportable incidents that occur or are alleged or suspected to have occurred to the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission, and of course the police where there are reasonable grounds. There are a significant range of resources produced by the Commission to support the introduction of CHSP, including new guidelines for in-home care providers. So I really encourage you to use these and other resources to check off on your systems and your processes and ensure that they align with best practice. It's also important to remember that while the reporting of serious incidents to the Commission is new, the minimum requirement within your contract has always been that you have an incident management system in place to identify, address, and resolve incidents within the context of the aged care quality standards. So I encourage you to build on your existing systems. I have included links to a range of resources here, and again, strongly encourage you to access and share these. And a heads up, the decision support tool, which is embedded in the Commission's website, is excellent, so check it out. The Commission will actually be hosting a webinar on Tuesday, the 21st of March to share some early lessons learned from CHSP in-home services. So I encourage you to keep an eye out for your notification when registration opens for this session. Also, just a quick reminder about the new Specialisation Verification Framework, which, as we know, is the process of confirming and certifying that a provider has demonstrated their ability to deliver services to one of the 9 special needs groups in accordance with a specified criteria. So once verified, a provider can promote their specialisation on My Aged Care via the Find a Provider tool. So the framework gives a detailed criteria and evidence guide to support your application. And of course, applications are now being received for independent assessment by AHA through the My Aged Care portal. Any current claims of specialisation that you have on My Aged Care at the moment that have not been verified will be removed on the 27th of February this year. Again, I've included some links to the range of resources here, and once again, encourage you to access and share these with colleagues. So the new Care Finder program commenced on January 2023, but of course it will include a ramp up or implementation phase through to the 31st of April 2023. So the Care Finder program will complement, not duplicate, aged care entry points that are currently available. And it'll specifically target senior Australians who might otherwise fall through the cracks. The program is focused on people who are eligible for aged care, who have one or more reasons for requiring intensive support to access aged care or other relevant supports in the community. We should also see the commencement of the Trusted Indigenous Facilitator program later in the year. There is limited information available about how the rollout of this will occur at this stage, and hopefully we'll hear more about that soon. I have again included links to resources if you're interested in learning more about the Care Finder program. So Eastern Melbourne PHN has announced the appointment of the Care Finder network in the east and the northeast of Melbourne. And you can see a list of the successful organisations on your screen. Providers who previously delivered the Assistance with Care and Housing program have also transitioned to care finders, and their focus is predominantly on homelessness and people at risk of homelessness. And again, you can see a list of those providers on your screen. So as mentioned, services will be scaling up over the coming months with full service from April 2023. And we look forward to welcoming and meeting with these providers at a future Eastern Sector Development event. On the 1st of December 2022, a new code of conduct was introduced for approved aged care providers. So while this code does not apply to CHSP at present, it is expected that it will be part of the registration and approval process for all providers from July 2024. So on this basis, it's recommended that you review the code and ensure your organisation's approach reflects the intent of the code, which is really about improving the safety, the health, well-being and the quality of life for people receiving aged care services. And it also aims to build confidence and trust in aged care. So the code has been developed based on the existing NDIS code of conduct. And of course, it includes 8 key elements, which you can see there on your screen. The code will be monitored and enforced by the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission, and enforcement actions may include banning or restricting individuals from working in the aged care sector. And I understand that there have been a couple of bannings or restrictions already published on the Commission's website. There are a plethora of resources to support your understanding and application of the code, and I've included links here for you to access at a later time. So hopefully some of you were able to share information with clients and perhaps contribute to the recent consultation to inform the new 10-year National Dementia Action Plan that's currently being developed. So the plan seeks to put people living with dementia, their families and their carers at the centre of all action on dementia. And it leads with the vision that Australians understand dementia and that people living with dementia and their carers have the best quality of life possible, and that no one walks the dementia journey alone. If you're interested in reviewing the draft plan, you can access it via the link on your screen. I think it's also worth mentioning that the star rating for residential aged care services are now available via the Find a Provider tool on the My Aged Care website. And much like TripAdvisor and other rating systems, these ratings are contextualised for aged care, but they're intended to help older people and their families understand how the service is performing, and also to help those seeking care to choose the right home for them. They are also designed to encourage continuous quality improvement over time. So the ratings are calculated using an algorithm that focuses on resident experience, staffing, and quality indicators and compliance. So we've done a bit of work here in the East over the past few years to promote the benefits of outcome measures, and this advice remains current. Recent advice, again from ACCPA, to the sector is that quality indicators are very likely to be introduced for in-home care, although it's likely that they won't come through until sometime after the new program design. But we could probably use the residential experience as a guide to assume that they will include some aspect of client experience, quality of life indicators, and compliance. If you haven't already done so, please check out our video, Moving to an Outcome-Based Approach, on our website. So the department has published a 2023 engagement calendar for the ongoing consultation through to June this year, at which point the department will hold its 4th webinar, and it will conclude with a national roadshow. We should expect to tick over into a year of transition from this point. And you can see on the calendar that the department is engaging in some targeted consultation at the moment, and this is really around self-management, flexible funding pool, home maintenance, short-term episodic clinical care, specialised funding arrangements, and hoarding and squalor. There is a lot happening, but I do encourage you to get involved. And if you want to find out more about these or previous consultations or upcoming events, please check in regularly with the Ageing and Aged Care Engagement Hub, and of course, visit the department's Reforming in-Home Aged Care website. You will have seen this in our previous briefing, but with all of the reform and the activities happening, it's more important than ever that you don't lose sight of its most important feature, which of course is your client, the older person. So with that said, I want to continue to encourage you to know your community. So be proactive to ensure that groups in your community have every opportunity to participate and be represented in all areas of your service. It's so important to know who's accessing your service and who isn't, why they aren't using them, and listen to what's important to them. Engage consumers to understand their needs and preferences. The new program will offer greater levels of choice for clients, so it's going to be all the more important for you to ensure that you're offering services and a service model that people are going to want and use. Knowing your community and understanding your consumer needs is likely to influence the relationships and partnerships that you develop. So take time to think what existing partnerships and relationships you need to nurture. Communication into the future will require a good understanding of your target audience. Who are they? And knowing where they get their information. Consider how you name and describe your service and eligibility. Is it a social support group or is it a weekly exercise program? Do you use plain English? Is it available in community language? Think about the visuals that you use and the mode of communication, whether it be digital or community posters or something else. And finally, we do encourage you to collect information to understand the impact of your service. So what difference are you making in the lives of people who use your services? So that's it from me. I wanted to thank you so much for joining me today. There is a lot happening and I know your time is really valuable, but equally the time that you commit to ensuring your organisation is ready for the change to come is extremely valuable and will have impacts for your clients. Please keep in touch. Read our e-newsletter. This is where I will be promoting events on offer. And of course, if you work in the Eastern Metropolitan region, please feel free to touch base by phone or email if you've got any questions. If you'd like to continue discussion about reform or would like support in any way. Thank you.